What's up guys, welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Ardell, and in today's video we're covering a great hippopotamus game played by none other than the Ukrainian GM Ruslan Ponomariov. Guys, what are we trying to do with the hippo? Well, we're trying to get a setup in which case we have both of our bishops being shadowed on b7 and g7. We're trying to put our two central pawns on e6 and d6, tucking those knights right behind, and then putting our pawns on a6 or h6, or usually both. Here we see the game start off with e4, now Ponomariov starting off with a modern defense g6, being shadowing that bishop, and then continuing with the d6, a6, and knight d7. Notice how there's not really a ton that white can do from stopping this setup. We see white expand on the queen side with a6, and now the key move b6. We play this move in response to a4 because notice, if we played a move here like e6, the move order here does matter a little bit because then white would have the opportunity to potentially play a5. And at that point, if we ever play b6 or b5, white could take the pawn on b6 or just use the role of en passant. But now by playing b6, we're prepared to meet this move a5 with b5 expanding on the queen side and potentially making this pawn on a5 a big weakness. We see white continue now with knight f3, and now Ponomariov continuing with e6, followed by h6. And now to move h3, knight e7, Ponomariov making it very clear that he's trying to reach that hippo setup. And here after castling kingside, we see bishop b7, Ponomariov officially reaching the hippo defense type setup. And now we see white continue with rook fe1. And the big question now is, okay, what do we do in this situation? We've got our hippo setup. What are the next steps? Well, if you're a hippo player, I really think there's two things you're trying to do. First off, you're trying to read and react. Notice how in the center here, white can't really do anything without giving us some kind of activity. If white ever breaks through with d5, all of a sudden our bishop on g7 is going to be active, and our knight on d7 is going to have some more squares to work with. And if e5 is ever played, our bishop on b7 is going to become more active, attacking that knight on f3, and our knight on e7 is going to be eyeing squares such as f5 and d5. Honestly, in a position like this, I'd probably recommend for black to close things up. I mean, if a move here like d5, let's play e5, and if a move like e5, let's play d5. But even in that case, our knights on e7 and d7 are about to get very involved. And so far, white has played pretty good chess, right? I mean, just normal, natural development, but it's hard for white to kind of make any new steps in trying to break this game open because of the current setup that we have. Here we see Ponomariov continue with this move of g5, which is a key idea in the hippo. And guys, I mentioned the first thing, which was reading and reacting. Whenever your opponent attacks, you're going to get some kind of activity in return. On top of that, you can try to get activity on your own. And one of the key ways of doing this is playing g5 and then putting your knight on g6, eyeing these key f4 and h4 squares. And on top of that, really just making a presence on the king side of the board and taking up a little bit of space. We see white here continue with knight f1, and now Ponomariov with knight f6. Another key idea, bringing both of our knights to the king side here, currently attacking this pawn on e4. And we now see white continue with knight g3. Notice that white went knight h2, knight f1, and knight g3. I still think the white has a solid game here, but this did take white quite a bit of time. And in the meantime, we've been able to improve our position as well. We see castling kingside from Ponomariov, and now bishop d3. Here, white just trying to defend their central pawns. It's pretty obvious that white doesn't really know how to break through in this position, and it's understandable. I mean, it's really hard to play against a strong hippo player such as Ponomariov. And now we see him continue with c5, which is a second key idea in the hippo, and that is using a flank pawn to try to put pressure on the center. In this case, playing c5 and putting pressure on d4. And if white ever takes, which is exactly what we see, we can take towards the center of the board. And we now see rook ad1 from white, followed by queen c7. Notice how easy this game has been from the black perspective. And here Ponomariov with a great middle game position to work with. We see this move queen e2 from white, and I personally don't really like this. I think that white needs to start trying to make some kind of progress with a move like f3, trying to consolidate their center, or maybe even this move f4, trying to expand on the king side. But this move queen e2, in my opinion, is just a little bit too slow, and it makes this bishop on d3 a little bit awkward. And now we're just able to expand in the center with d5, which actually threatens two things. First off, we're threatening d4, which, by the way, would just fork both the bishop and the knight and give us a ton of material. The second threat is just playing this move c4, and now because of queen e2, this bishop couldn't even move. So here we see white play the best move, which is taking on d5, and then now continuing with bishop c1. Whole idea being, obviously, d4 is no longer a threat, and if c4 is ever played, this bishop can now play bishop f5 or just take the knight on g6. However, here we see Ponomariov continuing with rook a e8, activating this rook, forcing the queen back to d2. Notice here how white has wasted quite a bit of time by playing queen e2, giving us that tempo, and then just bringing this queen back. And we now see Ponomariov continue with knight h4. Now, they say that the knight on the rim is dim, but guys, in this situation, I mean, this knight is attacking key squares such as g2 and f3. And notice here how our bishop is also indirectly putting some pressure on g2. I mean, if we ever play this move d4, attacking the knight, we're going to be attacking g2 with two of our minor pieces. So white's got to worry about this every single move. And we now see white actually use some good chess strategy, and that's trading down. And the reason for this is that they're currently attacked, and they currently don't have a ton of space or a ton of activity. Guys, if you're in a game and you're being attacked, you're pretty cramped, your pieces just aren't looking that great. They're not really offering too many threats. In that case, start trading down so that you have more room to breathe. We see rook e1 and both of these rooks coming right off the board. But now we see Ponomariov continue to push with this move of c4, pushing this bishop back to f1, which defends g2. Just in the case of d4, now white doesn't have to worry about any kind of bishop takes g2 ideas. But we see black play this anyways, attacking the knight on c3. And once this knight runs away to e2, queen c5. I mean, just defending both of these pawns, which are really just wiping out the third rank, making this a very cramped and uncomfortable game for white. And now the very next move, after queen d1, guys, in chess, we always have to be assessing our position and going, look, what pieces of ours could become more active? Our queen on c5 is very solid right now. I mean, defending d4 and c4, very active in this game. This bishop on b7 honestly can't get much better. Neither can our knight on h4, but this knight on f6 can become more active, and we see this move, knight e4, which actually offers a trade for the knight on g3, and on top of that, defends this pawn on d4 with our dark squared bishop. We see white start to trade down on e4, and then bring another knight back to g3, but we now see bishop g6. Nice little maneuver here by Ponomariov. I mean, an active bishop pair working together to put pressure on c2 and also defend this pawn on t4 again. I mean, both of these pawns are wiping out that third rank, and it's honestly hard for white to really make any kind of progress here. We see this move queen e2 from white, and here Ponomariov deciding to strike with d3, expanding, attacking that queen, and now we see white trade off pawns and then continue with queen e8 check. However, what happens here if white plays a move like queen e1? Well, guys, my general tip for you in a position like this where you have space, you have activity, and your opponent's pieces really don't have too many threats is to simply slowly improve the positioning of your pieces. Why not play a Karpovian move here like bishop d4? We're not in a rush. We're not trying to checkmate the king in two moves, but we're just trying to improve the positioning of our pieces and put as much pressure on white as we possibly can. Now we have a battery ram on f2, which is really making this queen on e1 a prisoner to that pawn. And on top of that, we're threatening to actually just take this pawn on f2, distract the queen, and then just win that bishop on c1 and send this pawn off into the sunset. But what if we see a move here like knight h1, just trying to hold on to that pawn? Whole idea being, obviously, I mean, if we take the pawn now, the knight's simply going to capture back, and we're going to lose a piece for a pawn. Okay, we're in no rush. We're going to play this move queen c2 and just keep putting pressure on the white pieces. White so far has stopped all of our threats, but look at the activity of those pieces. Not one of them even past the first rank. And guys, white's just not going to be able to hold on to this game very long, as we're currently eyeing both b2 and the pawn on a4. And if you compare all of our pieces, the queen on c2, our dark squared bishop, light squared bishop, and the knight on h4, they are all more active than if you compare the same pieces from the white side. So here we see white play the move queen e8 with check, which I actually really like this move. It's going to offer white some kind of hope to get some kind of perpetual check later on in this game. And now we see king h7 followed by bishop e3 from white. Here white trying to create some counterplay, attack this queen on c5. And now we just see Ponomariov take one step to the left with that queen, bringing that queen to d5 and eyeing this key square of g2 with both the queen and the knight. Here we see bishop d2. And on top of that, eyeing potential d2 ideas, right? I mean, d2 is protected by our queen, so in that case, white's going to have to give up their bishop or just allow us to make a second one. So we see this move bishop d2 preventing us from expanding our pawn, but in this case, okay, white simply cannot hold on to everything. This bishop flies out of nowhere, picks off a pawn on b2, and we now see this move of f3 from white. Now, again, I don't really think that there's much that white can do in a position like this. I think maybe a move like a5 would have been good, just trying to expand on the queen side a little bit. But y'all, this move f3 just kind of weakens the dark squares on the king side, in my opinion. I think it does more harm than good for white. We see this move bishop e5, which is now threatening to capture the knight on g3. So we see knight e4, which I actually think was a little bit creative because it allows us to take that knight off the board, which is what we saw in the game. But now after f takes e4, black has to be a little bit careful, guys. In a position like this, in your own games, you got to be careful whenever your opponent's queen is hovering around your king. You've had to lead the whole game, but you can give it up in an instant. For example, if we just take this pawn on e4, which looks like a good move, white is now able to take our key pawn on f7, whole idea being of king h8. I mean, we're just going to have a perpetual check. And if bishop g7 trying to hang on to some kind of advantage, this queen can slide over to d7, eyeing this pawn on d3. And all of a sudden, it's white who is the one who is fighting for the win. So y'all, we see this move f takes e4, and Ponomariov realizes the importance of not giving up this pawn on f7. So he plays the very strong and creative queen d4 with check, and then queen f2. Whole idea being he's attacking both the bishop on f1, the bishop on d2, and this pawn on g2. And on top of all of that, defending this key f7 pawn. And here white resigned the game. I mean, the whole idea is that, I mean, we're just going to take this bishop with a mate in 1, and white can't really defend it. And if this bishop moves, okay, we play queen takes g2, and we would have had ourselves a game over. Thanks for watching today's video. If you'd like to learn the theory behind the Hippopotamus Defense, click that video to the left. If you'd like to see a game in which white used the hippo to fight for the win and get that dub, click that video to the right. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.